everyone. Welcome to the School of Reinvention Podcast. I am your host, Roger Osorio. I'm a reinvention coach and author of the book, The Journey to Reinvention, How to Build a Life Aligned with Your Values, Passions, and Purpose. I am here with Veronica Lawson Vilches, who is a multilingual PR and content development specialist and the founder of The Word on Record. She graduated the Sorbonne with degrees in history and history of international relations, and she's worked with multiple purpose-driven businesses in enhancing their communication needs and telling their stories in ways that connect with their audience. She's an advocate for mental health and gender equality. For Veronica, it's about how content can be used for good. She's lived in 4 countries, the U.S., Spain, France, and currently living in Italy. By the way, Italy, one of my favorite countries in the world. Veronica, thank you so much for taking time to share your story with us and also, go into expert mode and teaching us a little bit about storytelling and effective communication for those of us who are on the journey to reinvention and just trying to figure out or struggling to tell that story.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited. I have to say I'm a little, it's different for me because I tend to be on the host seat. I tend to be the one interviewing people, trying to get their stories out. But so this is interesting. I'm excited to share my expertise and my story.
Well, I hope I live up to your standard to take the story out. I hope I get the story out of you really, but we'll see. I'll give it my best shot.
Thanks.
But let's kick things off. Let's dive right in.
Yeah.
When we obviously had a great prep call, you shared a lot about your story with me. And one of the things that I stood out for me was just how much you moved around when you were young. So I imagine you had to reinvent yourself a lot as a young person moving around. Tell us a little bit about your early journey.
Yeah. So I grew up in a bicultural household. So my dad is from the United States and my mom is from Spain. So already from there, it was like, kind of torn between 2 countries. And we moved around growing up a lot. And I, to the point where I lost track of how many schools I've really been to. I think it's like 7, 10, maybe. I don't know, anywhere between that. And we lived in Indiana, Minnesota, Nevada, Oregon. And so, it was moving around a lot. And a lot of people growing up, when I would say I've been to these many schools, they would ask me, are you a military child? And I'm like, no, it's just like that. Like, that's just, the career that my dad has had, and it's taken him to all of these different places. And so it was a lot of moving. It was a lot of reinvention, trying to figure out, when you go that first day of school, who do you want to become friends with? Who do you want to try to become friends with? Kind of adapt to different cultures. Specifically, I remember when we moved from Oregon to Nevada, for me, it was because we were moving from Portland and then we were in a small town, Minden, Nevada. And it was just complete difference. People were not into the same thing as people from a big city. And so they dress differently, they present themselves differently. And so it was a lot of adapting. And I think it's one of my best qualities of how easy I can adapt to a place. But it's also made me struggle a lot because there's been a lot of identity crisis within my life where I'm like, who am I? Is this really what I like? Or do I like it because people around me like it? So I just tend to adapt because that's the easiest thing to do. So, yeah.
That's an interesting idea. Do I really like this because I like it or because those around me really like it? And this is something that actually there's a parallel here that I want to draw to the journey to reinvention, especially for people who want to become first-time entrepreneurs. And I was on that journey. And I thought there were certain kinds of businesses that I wanted to bring to life. But I think it was, and I discovered later, it was more so because that's what I was reading a lot about. And
yeah.
I was hanging out with, that's what they were doing. And it took me a while before I actually was able to really check in with myself, and a long while, and realize, no, that's not what I really want. I actually had to learn it the hard way just by doing it and realizing, no, that's not what I want. So it's an interesting idea. You experienced that in a very different way, by living in so many different places. And you mentioned the identity crisis. I grew up, I'm half Cuban, half Peruvian, but I was born and raised in New Jersey. And so I too, like you, felt, I don't know what I am, like there's like,
Yeah.
and I don't know how it was for you guys, but especially depending on where you were living, I'm sure at any given moment. But when my dad was young, he encountered a lot of racism. And so he was very afraid of me and my sister having to live that. And of course, he didn't know how things were going to change and turn out. But at that time in, 1980s, in the early 80s, that's what he was experiencing. And so,
Yeah.
he gave us very American names. I mean, my name is Roger. And so it's like, that was a big part of his whole strategy. So it was almost like he wanted us to lean more into American culture and American, but at the same time, of course, but we're, genetically, I guess I'm not ethnic. I'm not that.
Yeah.
I totally hear you. How was that like for you?
Well, I think it was just, for me, it was in the United States, I was a Spaniard, and then in Spain, I was La Mexicana. And so, and obviously, too, in the United States, most people who tended to speak Spanish don't look at all like me because I'm blue eyes, white, pale skin. Like, so when I would speak, it would be like, who are you? Like, how do you speak Spanish? And it just felt like I could never present myself in a way where it was like it felt true to who I was, because no matter where I was always going to be somewhat different. With my cousins, they would often, growing up, I now have a very thick Spanish accent when I speak in Spanish, and it's from Madrid. Like, I say something and people are like, oh, you're from Madrid, right? But growing up, a lot of our friends tended to be from Latin America. And so there were expressions that I would take on, and one of the stories my cousin tends to say is she would make fun of me. One time I was crying so hard, and I was telling her, you broke my heart. But obviously in Spanish it came, me has roto el corazón. And in Spanish from Spain, it's corazón. And so she died laughing. Here she is making fun of me. And I'm just like, ah. And so it just felt like I never fit in no matter what. Like, it just, there was just, it was like that. And so it was very difficult. And someone who was very important in me accepting that there is this bicultural in me and I should be proud of it was my abuelo, my Spanish grandfather. He saw this one summer I was in Spain, and my cousins. It was a difficult summer. It was one of the best summers of my life, but there was a lot of, tension with my cousins and being like, but I'm also Spanish. Like, I understand what you guys are saying. And they're like, no, not really. You're American. You would never understand. And my grandfather, he saw this identity crisis that I was having. And he was like, I want you to understand that, like, you are privileged. You get to speak two languages. You are very smart. Your cousins are probably making fun of you because they don't know how to, they might be jealous. They might feel like you're different, but it's a good different. And in your future, you will be very proud of this. And he also told me, no matter if you're growing up in the United States, you need to know your mom is from Spain and your first language was Spanish. And so you should always be very proud that this is, where you're from, and that this can always be your home. And that really helped me. I mean, I think he was one of the very few people in my life who saw that kind of identity crisis and told me, lean into that difference that you have. Lean into the fact that you are growing up between two homes, and that's amazing. And that's something that not a lot of people in this world have the opportunity to have. And so just lean into it. It's not a negative, it's a positive.
I love that story. And there's so many parallels with the journey to reinvention, because there's an identity crisis that people are going through when they're reinventing themselves. I mean, when they're truly reinventing themselves and going from one domain to a very different domain. And I'll just use my example for argument's sake. I went from, my first reinvention was from commercial refrigeration sales. I sold beer coolers to Anheuser-Busch. And then I was pivoting into becoming a high school math teacher. I mean, telling beer stories is not going to work in a high school. It's not going to get you any jobs or any favors or any, any grace from anybody. And so it's really, there's this moment when you're early on that transition where you're kind of torn between two identities, the identity you're trying to become and the identity that you were, right? And what you were, and what your grandfather, what your abuelo said, I feel like is, wow, really powerful. I mean, we didn't even talk about this on our prep call. This is a really powerful piece of advice, because I feel like it applies incredibly well here. And if I was applying that, right, if your abuelo had said that to me, then, what it would have meant is that there's something that you can draw on from your sales work. This next chapter, you got to find what that is, but that's what's going to make you different. And that's what's going to help you stand out. And you mentioned that he he wanted you to look forward ahead to the future. Like maybe right now it's a little awkward and weird because you're in that transition or you're trapped in between two things. But in the future, when you figure out what you're going to do and you're leaning into that thing, oh, this will come in handy. Being able to speak to two languages, having that diversity of perspective and all of that. And I feel like that advice is exactly what played out in and all my reinventions was exactly that. I did lean into sales. I realized, you know what? I'm in a room full of students most of the time who didn't want to be there. So I had to sell them on a reason why they should be in that room with me and why they should give me all their attention and give me all their effort.
Exactly.
That was a sales job. That wasn't a teaching job. Honestly, like teachers usually taught sales because that's the first obstacle.
Yes.
To sell someone on that reason. And your abuelo's advice would have guided that, like, you know, and I discovered that later, but it would have been nice to have heard that during the transition when I was comfortable. And how the hell am I going to do this?
Yeah.
Having heard that would have probably been like, okay, I'm not sure yet, but it sounds like it's going to work out later. So it's a reassuring piece of advice.
And it's true, you know, like, I've learned different types of Spanish. You know, I grew up with friends who were from Mexico, who were from Puerto Rico, who were like, I've grown up with friends from all over the place who speak the same language, but we have different expressions. And that is something that has also been a pro in my career. You know, when I remember in one of my positions, I was translating the website into Spanish and we were trying to be as neutral as possible. And there was another teammate who was from Spain. And so when we were doing the translation, I said, you have to make sure that the expressions can be as neutral as possible. And I gave her a few examples of certain words that mean different things in different places in the world. And I remember her looking at me and saying like, oh, I didn't know that this word meant that in Latin America or in this country or in that country. And I'm like, yeah, for us, it's one thing, for them, it's different, you know? So for me, that really has helped me even in my career is having been able to grow up in a diverse culture and have diverse friends and be really open to the world.
Absolutely. I feel like, you know, people like you and I are, I mean, it's almost like we're chameleons to some extent, and it makes it easy to adapt quickly. But also, more importantly, it's not even about the adapting. At least for me, it's been, and I feel like, you know, your story will share this as well, that it's the same for you. It's about resonating.
Yeah.
It's like what you just shared is that you could connect very quickly and identify with, relate to, and resonate with a different audience, even though you're not you're not one of them originally, but you have a connection to them. You have some experience with them because of your friendships, where you lived, or whatever it was. And obviously in this situation, that paid off in a massive way, because you were able to say, hey, this would not resonate. This would not be a relatable way of explaining this because of this. And others were like, wait, for real? Like, I didn't know that because I only know one perspective. You're like, well, I know multiple and I know this will not connect. So I can, you know, and exactly. If you had the actual customer in front of your face, you would be the one to connect with them. I mean, I don't know about like, if you're, are you a football fan or a soccer fan?
No, I don't bother. I've tried.
I won't hold it against you. But for me, it's funny, but that has been one of the things that has helped me connect as I travel the world. So many people. Or when I connect with people who are, you know, who are visiting the U.S. from another country, it's like this common thing that most of the world does, you know, tend to like as a sport, because it's a sport that is in almost all countries. Whereas, you know, American football is really only here, and a couple other sports, maybe baseball, just a few more places. And so, yeah, it's finding those things, but those experiences really make us empower us, I think, to relate more, to connect more. I mean, which is a beautiful thing.
And that's really what I love about languages too. As I always, when I talk about learning a new language, I speak four, right? So I speak English, obviously, as American as we can get. I wish it was a little bit more British. It sounds a little more posh, but that's just how it is. You know, and then there's the Spanish, then there's the French, then there's the Italian. And with every language, I've learned a new way of thinking. And even within those languages, I've learned a different way of thinking. You know, here in Italy, what I love about Italy is such a small country, but there's so much culture and diversity the way they speak Italian in Napoli, that's their dialect. It's not Italian, it's their dialect. And then you come here to Florence, and Italian, what they speak today, was born in Florence. And so there's just already a different way of thinking, of ways to say things. And it's the same thing in Spain. And then, Spanish, but then you learn, you go to Mexico, and then they say things differently, and you learn of different expressions that they use, which means it's a different way of how they see and think about the world. And that's the power of language. And that's what I love. And that's why I think it's so important to try to learn a second, because it gives you a bigger vision of the world, but it also helps you become more introspective and to understand the world within you.
Wow, that is super deep. It's almost like deep enough to just end the conversation. Not going to. We have a lot more to cover. But that was really good. Wow. So I'm going to shift quickly because I don't want to. That's perfect. So let's talk a little bit about your journey into university, because that wasn't so straightforward. You had a plan to go 4-year university in the U.S., which is pretty much every American's plan. Yeah. But that didn't work out according to the plan. Tell us a little bit more about that.
No, so because we had moved around so much growing up, credits within, that's the American way of doing things in each state. It's somewhat like a country, right? So you need this kind of credit to be able to graduate. And so I had done my first year of 9th grade, half of the first year of 9th grade being homeschooled. And then we moved into going to high school because I am a very extrovert. I love being with people. And the year and a half I did homeschooling, I was very honestly quite depressed. And so my mom's like, no, we need to get you back into school. So the first school was very open to us, having me start school late, but understanding how I needed to catch up with my credits. Then midway through my junior year, we move and we go back to Indiana. And then we find out that I'm missing certain credits that in Oregon I didn't need to graduate. So then I spent my senior year, a good part of it being with freshmen, because there were certain credits that I had not taken because of my diverse, different upbringing, right? Of going to so many schools. So by the time I graduated high school, it was pretty much you do these you take these classes and you graduate, but you won't be able to get into a 4-year school because I just would not have the credits for what the universities were asking from me. So I would have to go through community college a year or two, and then I could go to a 4-year school. And it really upset me because I loved school. My mom didn't graduate from high school, and so she got her GED when I was born. And so she was very much you have to get your degree. It's very important. She'd always tell me it's the one thing people can't take away from you. And so it was okay, I was so mad because I'd taken so seriously my education. I'd taken AP classes, and here I am now so I have university credits, but I can't get into university because of having moved around a lot, right? So I was like, you know what? I'm just going to take a year break. I was looking at how I could move abroad and just, take a year off and figure things out. And I was looking into the Peace Corps. I was looking into just so many things. And my mom was like, how about you go to France, you be an au pair, and, in France, because I'd been taking French in high school, she goes, that way you're learning French. So you're not doing any, you're not just traveling, but you're even learning the language you've been learning. And I always said I want to learn French since I was 3 years old, since I watched Madeline and Anastasia and all these movies that, take place in Paris. So it was a big part of my dream. So I was like, okay, yeah, let's do that. And then that way I was also close to family. If anything happened to me, my aunt could come from Spain, anything. My mom was like, I just think it's the safest course. And so, yeah, I was there for a year, really liked it, and came to find that I could get into university in France because I had my high school diploma. So the French universities were not going to look at my credits. They would just, you have your high school diploma, you've graduated. Now all you have to do is take a French exam. So I was like, what do I do? Do I stay here or do I go back to the States and then go to community college, finish all that thing, and then go into a school. And I was like, I'm going to bet on myself. I'm going to give myself another year, and I'm going to learn French, and I'm going to see if I can get into a school. And so I did just that, and I got into school. So yeah, it was, that was pretty much how the university track came, right? And I wanted to do journalism, but in France, what they told me is to do journalism, I needed to have a bachelor's first. So that's where it came into, okay, what do I want to do? And I looked at history. I really loved history and international relations. And I got accepted into history. And then for my master's, I ended up doing history of international relations.
Very cool. The thing I want to lift up from that story for listeners is the navigating the obstacles as they come. This obstacle presented itself where you couldn't go straight into a 4-year university like you wanted to and like you had worked towards. And it's crazy, right? Because I used to be a high school teacher, so I know there's so many differences. The states operate like countries when it comes to education. They have their own way of doing things, and they don't jive with each other. So for someone who's moving from state to state, it's one thing if you were like just in Indiana or just in Minnesota or just in Oregon, you would have been fine. But because you cross state lines every time, and not like even neighboring states, like pretty like far states, I mean, gosh, everything changes. And that's the thing about the United States, right, that you've probably discovered and know very well, is that we may be one country, but it's like we're many. I mean, because from state to state, the culture changes and all of that. But to your point, also the education laws. And so you found yourself now not being able to do what you wanted to do because of stupid technicalities. You could be pissed. You could be angry. You could just give up. You could just say, screw this or whatever. But you didn't. Working with your mother, the two of you came up with another, a different idea. I think a lot of times on the journey to reinvention, and I think not just our journey, just in any life, we tend to see things as this or that, right? I can either go this way or I can go that way. And I feel like what that you and your mother did was, what if there was a third option? What would the third option be? And that's what the two of you came up with, was a third option. And while the third option, of course, is not the typical option, it does require a little bit of a willingness to take a chance on yourself. And you did. And and I love that you found alignment too. But what? This aligns with the fact that I did study French while I was in high school. I did have an intention to learn it more because it's a part of, my growing up and the kind of things that the cartoons and the movies that I liked a lot and all of that. So, hey, I mean, why not? Like, there's an alignment here. It's not like I'm just picking a random language either, or a random country just for the sake of killing a year. I'm like, there's a lot of intention here. And I love that because that's the journey to reinvention. There's so little certainty when you're moving from one domain to another. There's no one-size-fits-all strategy or anything like that. And what you experience is a very similar thing where, look, there was no one-size-fits-all strategy here, but you had a willingness to make it work for you. And you...
Yeah. I mean, and I was angry, though. I had worked really hard. I had believed that if I did everything correctly, I could get into a 4-year school. Excuse me. And I remember I had a blog at the time. I started a blog when I was like 17, 18. And I wrote an article called No Child Left Behind, but I was. Because I really felt that strongly of like, why is education in the United States like this? Like, I live in the same country. Why did this have to happen? I worked so hard. But then when I got into the Sorbonne, and I remember like, it was funny because when I told my parents, I'm going to the Sorbonne, they were like, oh, okay. I don't think they realized like the importance the Sorbonne is. And when one day my dad called me and he goes, I was watching the West Wing and one of the diplomats went to the Sorbonne. Isn't that your school? And I was like, yeah. So now you see that I'm going to a good, okay. But it, for me, it was when I got into that, I had this feeling that things happen for a reason and that I made the best with what I had. And that even though I had been so mad, I kind of let go of that anger. And I was like, if that would not have happened, would I have ended up in France? Probably not. And so instead of keeping that anger, I ended up really kind of releasing it and thanking that it happened.
Oh, wow. I love that. That that screams the journey to reinvention, because again, since there's so little certainty, you really can't predict. Almost anyone that I talk to, I ask them, could you have ever told this story before it all happened? Could you have predicted this? Could you have even come close to saying it could work out like this? This is a possibility. And everyone's not even close. I could never have imagined all the things that happened along the way, the good and the bad.
Yeah.
I'm grateful for all of them is what I hear. And that's what I'm hearing from you, that at the end of the day, you are grateful for the bumps on the road and the smooth parts of the road, because they all brought you to where you are today. And but I think it's important that we also acknowledge you also, you took each one of those bumps and the smooth parts of the road and you made them great. You made them work for you, even if you were angry or whatever it was, you found ways. And I think that's really important for anybody who's on this journey. And it will not be a linear path from corporate or full-time work or whatever, being an employee, to being a business owner, to being a first-time entrepreneur. That is not a line or anything like that. There will be setbacks, but those setbacks don't have to be complete devastations either. Like in your case, they became part of your story, and I just love that. I think that's really awesome. I want to move into, because you alluded to this intention you had, this goal you had to pursue journalism, but it sounds like that didn't work out in the end. You and I talked a little bit about your passion for writing. Tell us a little bit more about your passion for writing, because that's been a part of you for some time, right?
Yes, it has. So since I was 3, I have loved writing. I think I've always just loved storytelling. My mom has a little journal. She's kept it. I think there's the Looney Tunes, the bunny or something on the in the front of the journal, and it's spiral, and you open it, and all you see in this journal is little circles. And people I was 3 years old, all I could do was hold a pen. And people would ask me, what are you doing? I couldn't read, I couldn't write, but I would say, I'm writing a story. And so I think that speaks volumes to just how much telling stories has always been a part of who I am. I love finding what makes people different. I love finding that story that makes them different, and getting that out of them. And it's something that's always been a part of me. And so growing up, until middle school, I was I'm going to be a writer. I'm going to write a book. And I still want to write a book one day. I have all these ideas, in my head, especially with all the experiences I've had in my life. But then when Obama won the presidency in 2008, it was such a historical moment. And that was when I was I was seeing all these journalists be a part of that history. And obviously, as someone who has studied history, the written word is so important, because that's how we can go back and study time, right? Study past civilizations and such. And I just remember thinking, wow, that's amazing. This is a big historical moment. And that's when I was I want to be a journalist. Then we move into high school, and it became, I really liked Taylor Swift, and she has a great way of telling storytelling. Her songs are just, you could dissect them in the way she does storytelling. But I was I want to be a songwriter now. And, I've been doing piano since I was 5 years old. I learned how to play the guitar. I played the violin. So it was okay, let's mix music and that storytelling aspect. Then I was doing musical theater. I wanted to be an actress. So at the end of the day, all of these, what I wanted to be, all my dreams since I was little, was somehow tell stories. And then when I graduated high school, I said, okay, I kind of, acting can always be there. Singing can always be there. I can always take classes, but I wanted to get a degree in something that I felt like I could use down the line. Because I wasn't sure that I really wanted to be an actress, but I loved it. It was something that I was passionate about. And so we went back to that. I want to be a journalist. And when I moved to France, they told me that to be a journalist, there was a specific course I had to take. But the more I learned about it throughout my bachelor's while I was doing history, the more I learned it was very difficult as a foreigner. And I mean difficult, one, because of the language. Secondly, because to get into these courses or these classes, these universities, you had to really have a deep understanding of the French culture, meaning you had to have grown up French, because they would ask you random questions on the test that you could prepare all you wanted, but if you didn't know these answers, you were never going to, if you didn't grow up knowing who the 1978 goal from this French player was, you never knew what that cultural question could be. And so I looked at a few journalists that I liked, and I said, none of them really studied journalism. So, a lot of them are lawyers. A lot of them did political science. And so that's how I ended up in history of international relations. So yeah, it was, just kind of finding my own path to get to where I wanted to go.
I love this story because it was a fundamental part of you before you could even do it.
Yeah.
I love how at 3 you're saying, I'm writing a story before you could even write a story. It's really interesting because I didn't think about this in our prep call, but this is kind of like the idea of, fake it before you make it, right? They say. And you were faking it before you made it. You were already telling people, I'm writing a story right now.
And not only that, but funnily enough, it was even with French. So I was never one who played with toys. I fell in love with the French language one day, accidentally put a movie in French. And now I wanted to watch all my movies in French. And my mom says, she looks back, she's like, I kind of feel bad that I never let you watch the movie, because she was so strict. She was like, you need to watch Spanish, you're going to learn Spanish, and this is what you're going to do, right? But my mom would sometimes find me because I would play with my imagination. I would act out things. And she would find me in my room just going, like making up a language. And she'd ask me, what are you talking? And she goes, and I'd go, I'm speaking French. And so it's that I've always faked it until I made it.
You must not speak French. That's why you don't understand it. But I love it. Oh my gosh. This is that we did not cover this in our program.
No.
Awesome story. But I love this because, it speaks a lot to this journey, right? Where going back to this idea, this issue with the identity crisis, when you're trapped between the identity that you're shedding and the identity that you're looking to step into, this moment in the middle, why not just say that you're a teacher? Why, like in my case, like when I was moving into, look, I'm a teacher. I'm not the greatest teacher yet, but I'm a teacher. That's what I'm stepping into. So let me just call it that. And I'm just at the beginning of that journey, and that's okay, right? Because not every teacher has to be the full-blown greatest teacher on the planet, or, you name whatever it is, a journalist or anything like that, or whatever it might be, or speaking French or writing stories. It's like, look, you were writing circles. You were just drawing circles in a notepad, but hey, those are your stories. Speaking gibberish, but hey, you know what?
That's been
French, so hey, she doesn't know. Maybe you were speaking French. But it's like, you played it off. No, I think that's really cool because I think I have to believe that, when it comes to young kids, that's not an issue to fake it before you make it, to just pretend, right? Because that's what kids do. They pretend, and in their mind, that pretending can be so real.
Yeah.
Because it becomes so real, you create the conditions. Of course, when you're young, you don't have full control over bringing it all the way to life because you're still too young, and others obviously, are still in charge of you and all of that. But that you do at least set one of the most fundamental conditions, believing that it's possible to get there. And imagine doing that as an adult, right? Being able to like tap into that childlike behavior or, skill.
And sometimes I even think when we're younger, we're smarter because we don't set our own boundaries. We really dream of everything that we can do, and we don't set limitations to ourselves. So sometimes, just sometimes we're smarter when we're younger.
No, I mean, I think you're right. There's a study that was done on, they call it the marshmallow test, where you had to build, I think it's like a tower of marshmallows? No, a tower of sticks that you had to put a marshmallow on top or something like that. And the tallest structure wins, right? And they've done this study with so many different groups of people, MBAs, architects, like executive leaders, high school students, whatever, you name it, all these different groups. And one of the best groups at this, aside from, you can imagine architects being pretty good at this, are the youngest kids. Yeah. And when they studied, okay, but what is it that makes the younger kids better at this? Like, why are they better at this? They clearly don't have any advanced knowledge that the adults don't have. So what the heck is it? And what they found was really interesting. It's and this is, I'm realizing now, wow, this connects so well to what you were doing. It's that they, rather than spending the limited time they have to do this exercise, planning, overthinking, trying to, hey, all right, Veronica, you're going to be like in charge of this, and I'll be in charge of that, and so-and-so will be in charge of this. Okay, let's get to work and let's try to figure this out. What they did differently was that they just dive right in and start trying. So the only difference between them and everyone else is they get more attempts than everyone else. Some groups are like the extreme worst of that. They will put all of their efforts into one major attempt, and it most likely fails. Whereas the kids go through so many attempts that eventually they stumble upon what works and they get it.
But isn't that life? Aren't we supposed to stumble over? We're supposed to mess up and start again. Yeah.
And that's starting in the first place, right? And
exactly,
you did, right? In those moments where you were really young, you scribbled those circles in your notepad. You spoke that French gibberish, like pretend French, but you were starting, right? You didn't say, I got to wait for all the sticks to be perfect. I got to plan it all out. I got to enroll in classes, and then I'll do all this, and then I'll say I speak. No. Why don't I just start speaking now? What's the worst that can happen? I'll just speak gibberish until it gets better. And look, now you do.
And that's the thing. Yeah. Like learning a language, you cannot learn all the grammar and then speak the language. You have to throw yourself into it. You have to put yourself in very embarrassing moments where you say really weird things and you're like, that was not what I meant. Like one of the stories, and I think I've shared this on LinkedIn, when I was learning French, I wanted to say I was hot, but it easily became something sexual because of the way I had the way I had conjugated it. And I just remember with my host mom being so embarrassed, 19, my host mom's like, we don't say that. And so it was just like, we say that in other instances of our lives. And I was like, oh, okay. And I got but if I hadn't gone through that, then I would have never learned that mistake, right? And so you have to be open to, when you're learning a language and just in life in general, to mess up and be like, okay, go back. What did I learn from this? Never say that again. Got it.
Oh my gosh, I love that. And and that's entrepreneurship as well, right? Because when I teach entrepreneurship and I work with a lot of people who are first-time or aspiring first-time entrepreneurs, and one of the most common obstacles is the fear of getting started.
Yeah.
The fear of even just trying, right? It's wanting to be, to your point, wanting to know all the grammar before you launch that first sentence. And as you said, you can't know all the grammar before you launch the first sentence. You have to launch the first sentence, have the embarrassing moment that you'll never forget, and you'll never get it wrong again. Figure it out that way. And that's how you'll get there more quickly. Same thing goes for entrepreneurship. It's, the sooner you try, the sooner you can iterate. And really that goes for everything, right? Like if you're playing a sport, if you're playing golf, like, read all you want about it. You can read all you want about swimming. You can watch all the videos in the world. But at the end of the day, if you don't jump into a pool or pick up a golf club,
you're never going to learn.
It's just not going to happen. So speaking of entrepreneurship, let's talk about your journey, into entrepreneurship. So because now you had to find a different way to get to your North Star. Obviously, you had to go through the path of studying international relations and history and all of that. And so, you didn't choose, you weren't able to go that path of the traditional journalist in France. So tell us a little bit about your journey since your graduate program, and how you got into entrepreneurship, which I think also kind of connects us to how you got to Italy as well.
So I went through a few difficult things in France, which left me mental health wise. And since I tend to say, I think by sharing our stories, we can help other people. So yeah, I was I went through a few things in France that left me really, really traumatized in a sense, not in a sense, left me traumatized. And so when COVID happened, I actually, for a really long time, didn't pick up a pen because of a lot of things that were happening in my life. And so I didn't write, not even in a personal journal. For like 3 years, I didn't write. 3 to 5 years, I wasn't writing. And so when COVID happened, a lot of people view COVID as a time of they don't look at COVID fondly, that being locked up and stuck away from people. I honestly found it to be one of the most freeing times of my life, being locked up, because there I was really alone. I just left my ex-partner, my ex-boyfriend, and I was just like, for the first time, just what felt really free, to be quite honest. And even though we were locked up, that's when I started writing again. And that's when I was really just like, really working on becoming, on getting to a healthier place mentally. And I remember for a really long time, I continuously said, I don't want to leave Paris. Paris is not everything that happened to me. I want it to be the place where I healed, that I, was able to confront all of these very awful things that happened. And then one day I saw a quote that said, how can you heal in a place that hurt you? And it really changed completely how I was viewing things, and I really saw that I was just really in the trenches. So I started looking at potentially even taking a break from France, like I did what was supposed to be in the States, and I looked at going to Spain, living with my aunt. And while I was doing that, I was looking for jobs in Spain, and I said, if I'm going to leave France, why don't I go somewhere where I've always wanted to go to? And I always, since arriving to France, always said, okay, because it was between France and Italy when I first moved to Europe. And I said, okay, I've always said I want to do a summer in Italy as an au pair. So why don't I do a year? I find a family and do that. And so I put my profile up on a website for au pairs, which is a babysitter that lives with the family. And within 72 hours, a family had confirmed me, loved me, wanted me to come down to Florence. And I was like, okay, I have 2 weeks to pack my bags and leave. And so that's how I came to Italy. And it was supposed to be only a year break from France. And then the more I was here, the more I really saw that I was getting better. I was getting healthier. I was happier. And I felt, really in control of what I wanted to do with my life for really the first time in my life. So that's how I ended up in Italy.
Wow. I one thing that stood out from that story is the role you took on after high school, to become an au pair in France, how you
repeated.
That was an effective way to make the pivot. And so why not use a vehicle that worked once before to make a pivot again? And I think that's such an important story because, again, I'm always drawing parallels to the journey to reinvention and people making those significant pivots in their life. If it worked once before, I think sometimes we look back and say, I can't do that again. I've outgrown that, or I'm past that. I have a master's degree or I have a bachelor's degree. I can't go back to being an au pair. But it worked. It's an effective strategy. And you were like, you know what? That's an effective strategy. So we're going to do that. It reminds me, for instance, when I was in high school, I used to park cars to make extra money. And it made more money than working at a supermarket or working at a store, like at a retail store or something like that. And when I was in my first career job, here I am with 2 bachelor's degrees in finance and international business. And I'm in a leadership development program at a Fortune 500 company and all this kind of stuff. I needed to make some extra money. But again, I didn't want to do it. I didn't have a lot of time because I had a day job that took up more than 40 hours, maybe 50-ish hours a week. So I needed something that can make more money in less time. Yeah. I went back. I'm like, it worked once before, but I could have looked at it as oh, but that's a step backwards to go back to parking cars. That's something I did when I was in high school and all of that. But it was an effective way to not have to spend a lot of time, making that extra money that I needed to achieve another goal. So we're going to rinse and repeat and use that again. And that's what stands out to me about this story. And you leveraged that effective strategy to launch this reinvention, which was in terms of your lifestyle, like the life you needed to rebuild. And you, like you said, I love that quote. Say that again. The one where, you can't stay in a place where...
Yeah, how do you expect to heal in a place that hurt you? Something like that. It wasn't the exact quote, but that was what I... Yeah. And for me, it was like, that's so true. And I had been working so many years to make Paris, specifically Paris, positive again. It was an amazing experience that first year. I think it's one of the best years of my life, that first year as an au pair in France. But then, by second year of university, it had gone really, personally, had gone really, really awful. And I was fighting a lot of, mental battles and a lot of just really difficult things. And so it was, if this was a place that had hurt me, how could I expect to heal when it continuously found ways to trigger me? And so it was like, to take a break, that's okay. Now I can go back to Paris often, and I've been able to remake it a better place. And it's still home, because Paris is the place I've lived in the longest, 7 years. So there's also kind of that aspect to it. But yeah, it was, that's why I came to Italy, because it was like, okay, maybe I do need to like take a break and find another way to heal. Because if you're consistently battling, you're just making more wounds.
Yeah. So let's talk about your journey into entrepreneurship, because you've worked for several companies, but now you're working on your own thing. You're starting to build out your own vision. So take us a little bit through some of those stops along the way very quickly, but then tell us a little bit about how you began to build this, because that's one of the things that is really helpful for our listeners, is how someone goes from they're being an employee to becoming a business owner, and how they bring an idea to life. So yeah, take that away.
Yeah. So my first internship out of university was in communications. And it was specifically for the Spanish market. And so that's why the accent over the O is on my LinkedIn profile, because, I'd been working in the Spanish market, and my last name, Lawson, is so Anglophone. When I was reaching out to journalists, I was like, they're going to think I don't speak Spanish. So I just added the little O. And I absolutely loved it. I loved the fact that I was getting into contact with journalists, selling this company's story. And I got them into, one of my biggest, things I did in that company was getting them into the biggest newspaper in Spain. And so it was like, I really love this job, because even though I'm not the journalist, I'm still working with them to tell a story. And so then that carried over into the other jobs that I had. A lot of it was, content, SEO, writing. But then in the last position I had, there had never really been a position that was doing PR specifically. And so I just loved it. And I got them into some of the biggest French newspapers, into one of the biggest French news channels for business. And I had done all of that with zero contacts with French journalists. I had no contacts when I started in this position. And I just was learning along the way. And it was just something I really loved doing. And so it didn't work out at that company. But, it didn't work out for many reasons. And I think one of them was because I felt stuck, because I wasn't able to do 100% the project that passioned me the most, which was how can we get the name of this company out even more, right? And also because it's a company that does good. And I love working with companies that have a purpose-driven vision behind it, that want to do some kind of good. And so I was like, you know what? It just kind of happened. I started publishing on LinkedIn. I started kind of being like, I want to do something on my own. And by doing something like this, I felt like I had more control of where my career could go. And even to the sense of I could go back to that original dream of being a journalist. Like I'm now going to have, in the following week, I'm going to have an article that's published in my name. And so all of this is just like, I've been able to do this because I decided to take this decision. And that's why, and I'm so excited. And it's, it just kind of goes back to that. This was my original dream. I'm going to find a way to get there.
I love that because, even the stops that you've made working at other companies, you found a way to get closer to your North Star, maybe indirectly, right? You mentioned, hey, there's another side to journalism. It's the side where you're on the PR side representing the company and helping the journalist build the story. But you leaned into that because you're like, cool, I'm around these folks.
Yeah.
And I love that part where you help one of your companies get an article featured in a pretty big way, and you did it without the contacts, which obviously in the PR world, such an important thing is everyone sells their list of contacts, like, and who they know.
Yeah.
And to have to do that from scratch, obviously, is a really major accomplishment. But then you also realize that at some point, these roles are no longer serving you as well as they used to be. You kind of like, I always call it, you squeezed all the juice you could out of that opportunity, and there just wasn't any more juice. Like, and so it's not like it was a bad thing. It just wasn't any longer a good thing.
Yeah.
It wasn't really like, there's no juice to be had here, and you want to keep squeezing juice out of something. And so that's what inspired you to say, hey, let me take matters a little bit more into my own hands, and let me start to practice the things I want. And by the way, congratulations on the article that's coming out soon that you just referred to.
Yeah.
I don't think when we had our prep call, I don't think that had come up yet. So
no,
that's awesome.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm so excited. Yeah.
Very cool. So we'll have to put that link in the description as well when the episode airs. So when it's ready, send it, because your episode will come out in a few weeks. So this will probably be out, and we'll feature that as well. That's really cool. I'm excited for that.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, but a really cool story. Now, tell me a little bit more about, so let's talk about, let's talk about a little more about the Word on Record, your business. Tell us a little bit about the types of clients that you're working with, who you've decided to really focus on and serve the most, and what's the problem that you're solving for them?
So I work with a diverse range of people. They're anywhere between solopreneurs to new companies that are starting. And it's really, first of all, we start from the foundation of what's your story? What's your story? What makes you different? And then we go into what is your ICP, and what is this? How can we connect? But like ICP, it's ideal customer profile. Yeah. And how can we tie both of these together? And it's strategizing their content for that. And then afterwards, I work with, now that we've got the foundation story, now we've got your content running, how can we get this into more press? How can we, write articles about you? And so that's pretty much what I do is really helping people spread the message of what they're doing, their communication, strategizing it correctly so that it works with who their customers are, but also sending a positive message as well. Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that, because I've been working on this business that I call the School of Reinvention, which, here we are on the podcast of that business, and, I'm building out other parts of it as well. And I've been on this journey since I got laid off in 2020 during the pandemic. And I have, the hardest thing has been to identify the ICP, the ideal customer profile, and the problem that I really saw in their world, in their experience. And what you do for people in terms of helping them write that content, I have learned the hard way how difficult it is to write good content without an ICP, without a focal point of a problem that you solve and all of that. And of course, I had to go through many iterations and all of that. And it's only recently that we started having the breakthroughs in terms of like who that real ideal person is. And it's only in the last couple of months where it got even like crystal clear, like who it is. And now we have to go back. And it's funny you say like, so you got to build your story around that. What's your story in relation to your ICP? And you actually I wrote an action now down that I'm like, oh my gosh, I have to do this. And it's funny, he says, we have this contact in common, Marisa Lopez, and she helped me write my story. It's the best bio I've ever had. I've always hated my bio. I don't know, hate is so strong word. I've never really felt connected to my bio. I've never felt proud of it. I've struggled so much, and we're going to go into this is going to be a topic that we're going to talk about to close things out, but
yeah,
I've struggled so much to tell my story as someone who's reinvented themselves so many times. And this has been a really big challenge. And it's only recently that I, thanks to Marisa, that I finally have this story that I'm like, wow, I'm actually proud of this story. This is a story that I really, really like. And it was only, she did this for me in November, but it was before I discovered the crystal clear version of the ICP. And I just like wrote down reach out to Marisa and she'll probably listen to it, but she'll hear from me before the episode comes out. Reach out to her to do a rewrite with the new ICP. I'm like, oh my gosh, I have to do that. And it's not far. Like, her version of the story is not far, but it wasn't as crystal clear as it is now. So I'm like, oh, it does require a rewrite. So that was a good tip right there, because it's so important, right? Like, the way you tell your story, it has to connect with who you're trying to serve.
Yeah.
And that's such a key idea for any first-time entrepreneur. You got to have that story, which kind of takes me to this question that I wanted to ask you, because, like I said, writing bios has been one of my biggest pain points along the journey to reinvention, especially after I go through another reinvention, reinvention after reinvention. I'm like, how do I tell this story without sounding like I'm just rattling off a timeline? Because at best, that's what I did, was rattle off a timeline that made no real sense. And so the other tough moments on the journey for anybody, and I've heard this from a lot of clients of mine, is when you're at a networking event and going back to what we talked about, when you're in between the two identities, you're shedding the old one, but you haven't yet stepped fully into the new one. And it's like, how do I introduce myself when, of course, the question comes up, oh, it's nice to meet you, Roger. What do you do? And I'm like, I don't want to tell you that I was a commercial refrigeration salesperson, or that that's what I do, because that's what I'm walking away from. I'm trying to not do that anymore. But I don't consider myself a math teacher yet, so I don't know how to say what I do. And it was the worst time it was the worst experience of a networking event, was being asked that question. And every time I felt like I was just saying a different version of it. And I'm like, oh, yeah, none of these versions are getting better. What, from your perspective, as someone who helps companies figure out how to tell a story that differentiates themselves and really helps them stand out, how can someone stand out in a moment where they're not even sure they stand in to that identity yet? Like, they're not even in. How do you stand out?
So when I started all this, I was like, I'm going to be a virtual assistant. I knew that was wrong. From the second I was like, do I really want to be an assistant though? Like, do I really want to go through people's emails and all the social media content and all this? Then I was like, I'll be a copywriter. And then it was like ghostwriter. And then I'm like, why am I doing all of this? See, if at the end of the day, what I want to be is a journalist and do PR. And so it takes time in that time span of when you're a little what am I doing? I'm starting something. I don't know where I'm going, to really lean into your story. And that's where I think a lot of people, they get lost too much in the future, but they don't think about how their past affects their future. So for example, let's take an engineer that all of a sudden I don't want to I did engineering because I thought I was going to, get a good living, make a good wage, all of this, but I want to be an artist. How did being an engineer help you, get better at being an artist? Because there's so many ways that, being an engineer probably helps you become a better sculptor, a better artist. And so it's really just leaning into what has made you you now, and then how that's going to affect your future.
Yeah. So when I made that transition from commercial refrigeration sales to becoming a high school math teacher, and we kind of talked about this a little bit ago, the skill that I leaned into was in my past was selling. I realized I need to sell math to these students, not teach them. They don't need me to shove this down their throats. They need me to convince them. They need me to sell them on a reason why they should take this from me. And I didn't know that, of course, at the time. So I only wish I could hop in the time machine and go back and tell younger me, I should say, that, hey, talk about your sales skills. Talk about that, because that's going to be so big. I didn't have that. But it sounds like that's what I would, if I'm following your advice back then, I would be leaning into my selling skill and how that selling skill has made me who I am today. And I can sell math instead of beer coolers to a beer company. I can sell math to math students, man, maybe even math students who don't want math. I could even convince them. It's like, they say a good salesperson can sell ice to an Eskimo, right? It's like, I'm good. I don't need ice. But hey, you know what? I got you. I can still sell that to you. Mm-hmm. And I didn't have that. I didn't know how to say that. That was such a tough thing. But I love what you're sharing here about that. How can then we, when we talked a little bit on our prep call, you also talked about maybe telling a story that highlights the potential, because at this point, that's really all you have, right? Like, it's not like you have the results yet. It's not like you have the skills, all those skills yet. You definitely don't have the experience yet. But you mentioned potential, and that we can craft a story around potential.
Yeah. And that's what people really lean into. People love the stories of the underdog. That's what has always been what people connect with, because we don't see ourselves as perfect. We see ourselves as, we had to go through our trials to get to where we want to go, right? And a lot of, I on my LinkedIn, I've written about what it's like working with me. This is what, if you're a ghostwriting client, this is what we'll go through. This is the process of onboarding. This is blah, blah, blah. I've gotten 0 leads from that kind of content. I still do it because it's important for people to know what they get when they work with me. What has resonated the most with people have been my stories of living abroad, my stories of learning a new language. I have an Italian client who loved the potential of, I understand their culture. Let's write post in English. Then we reworked it and we've seen, okay, post in English aren't really working. Let's go back to the Italian, but use, the English format to be a new thing in the Italian market, right? So people connect with the potential of what they see of how they can work with you. And so that's very important.
And in your case, that highlights how you brought a very different set of experiences than probably someone who is, fully Italian, only lived in Italy, and didn't have that other perspective, the American perspective on, hey, okay, so we won't use English. We learned that didn't work, but we could use a format that is used a lot in the U.S. and just do it with Italian language, and let's see if that works. And
yeah.
And it gives you more. You bring innovative ideas from another place that someone who was in the traditional route did not, or could lean into, or could not tap into, I should say. You are able to do that. That's, I think that's really powerful, because that's, again, it's consistent with what you said earlier. That's really, as you tell that story, you're leaning into your past. You're leaning into what makes you, as you put it. And what makes you is the fact that you grew up in not just one part of the U.S., you grew up in 4 parts of the U.S., multiple times in some cases. So, so you had that diversity, which, by the way, not every American has that. I mean, so many Americans just grew up where they grew up, and that's where they live, and that's the only experience they have. So you also had diversity of within the U.S., and then add to that France and Spain and all these other countries you've had connections to and people you've met along the way. That's what made you, or that's what creates the really special potential for you. I think back to my first high school, my first high school teaching gig that I got, or job that I got, and the superintendent who gave me that job, or offered me that job, really took a chance on me. And I'm really lucky that he said something, which now is connecting to something you said, because it helps explain maybe like what it was that he was actually buying when he made me an offer. And he said, when you tell your story, what I get out of that is your energy and your passion. And he saw those as the differentiators.
Yep.
You have a deep, deep passion for this, and your energy is so freaking high. He goes, look, and then he said this, which I was like, he goes, look, I know you've never done this job before. I mean, that's not a secret. Obviously, you're not hiding it, but, any quick search on you, like, I know you've never done this before. And that's not why I'm hiring you, is what he said. I'm not hiring you because you have done this before. I'm hiring you because of what you bring that I don't see typically, and that I think we need right now in my in my school situation and the problems that we're having here.
Yeah.
So that's why I'm giving, and I was like, wow, because here I am trying to, like, how do I pretend to be as good as somebody who has all these years of experience when I don't? And that's the challenge of reinvention, right? Like, you're up against those folks. But, what you just said is what explains why he said what he said. And I never really understood that until, like, right now, he was listening to something that I was saying that I didn't even know I was saying intentionally, because I wasn't saying it intentionally, and I can't take credit for that. I was just sharing who I was. And because of that, he saw these things in me. And so for someone who's listening now and they find themselves in that situation, it sounds like what you're telling us to do is lean into who you are. Talk about that. Talk about how you become the person you are, because that's what someone's buying ultimately. And so right now you don't have the skills to draw on. You don't have the experience to draw on. That's all in your future. And you can't talk about your future right now. So go backwards to find all the things you can talk about that are very real, very tangible, that we can all fall in love with. And when you go to that networking event, talk about that. Let us fall in love with you, the evolving human before us that is about to become a rock star, whatever, fill in the blank, and get us excited about that.
Exactly. And apply your past to what you are going to become, and have it, when I started out on this journey as an entrepreneur, the one thing I continuously said is, I'm a writer. I didn't know what kind of writer I was, but I was like, I'm a writer. And I mean, I love writing books. I love writing poetry. But like when it came down to what kind of writing I would do for my career was, I don't know, what kind of copywriting, ghostwriting, what does that mean? But I just continuously said, I'm a writer until it became true, because that's where I wanted to go. So there's also kind of that, I manifest it in a way. And I think that's what the power of words they really have. They change your mindset. And if you're like, that's what I am, and that's what I'm going to be, if you continuously repeat that to yourself, there's more possibility that it will become true, because you don't give up on that dream.
Well, I think this is the perfect place to leave the conversation, because it's one of the biggest challenges, but you've offered us a really great solution here. And I just want to thank you for your time, for first sharing so openly about your story, your own journey to reinvention, but also helping us navigate that journey through a skill that has become a key part of your life, and is the driving force to get to your North Star. And congratulations again on the article. I can't wait for us to have that in the description with all your other links so that we can share that published piece of work, because it sounds like you're on your way.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited. And it was such a pleasure being here today and talking about my story, but also how people can really tap into their potential and use their story for their future.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And all of the links, everything, her story, everything will be in the show notes. So do take a look, visit her website. And if you're looking for someone to help you tell a better story about your company or your solopreneur journey or whatever it might be, definitely reach out. There are lots of opportunities to book a meeting with Veronica, so you will be able to do that. Thank you again. I appreciate you.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the School of Reinvention Podcast. Again, I'm your host, Roger Osorio. If you're ready to start your journey to reinvention and want to walk the path with others, visit www.rogerosorio.com and go to the School of Reinvention to check out for yourself how a community-based coaching platform can help you begin your next reinvention. You can also go to rogerosorio.com to purchase my new book, The Journey to Reinvention, and receive some exciting bonuses. Until next time, make your day great.